Wrong house. Wrong man. And at 12:03 a.m., Declan knew the moment the first boot hit his door that someone had just made the worst mistake of their career. The frame exploded inward, light slicing through the dark as 4 officers stormed in like they were hunting a criminal. But the real danger wasn't the cops charging into his home. It was the fact that Declan didn't panic. He didn't scream. He simply raised his hands, steady, trained, like a man who had survived this kind of night before. And that calm, that silence, was the first clue that these officers had kicked down a door they should have never touched. The wood was still falling from the air when Detective Troy Reed shoved him face down onto the floor. Declan's cheek hit his hardwood, but his breathing remained controlled, not because he was fearless, but because panic had no tactical value. The officers had barged into what they believed was the home of a vulnerable man. Instead, they walked into a place built by someone who had prepared for 18 months for exactly this kind of fracture in the night. Reed barked at him to stay still. Declan didn't move. His hands stayed visible, his posture steady. No pleading, no trembling, just focus. And Reed noticed. Milo Flores, the officer sweeping left, noticed. Even Finn Butler, scanning the hallway, noticed. Civilians weren't calm like this. Not at midnight. Not with 4 armed officers shouting over each other. Declan's neighborhood wasn't built for scenes like this. Henderson was calm, quiet, suburban. People watered lawns, argued about HOA rules, waved at each other on evening walks. Which is why, within seconds, porch lights blinked on across the street. First 1, then 2, then 5, then phones appeared, glowing rectangles capturing everything. This was no quiet raid. This was a public disaster unraveling in real time. Reed yanked Declan up by the handcuff chain, dragging him toward the living room. Declan didn't stumble. He didn't lose his footing. That bothered Reed more than anything. "You think this is funny?" he snapped. Declan didn't respond. Not because he couldn't, but because silence was his strongest weapon. Every second he kept calm, Reed's uncertainty grew. Neighbors whispered. Paige Murphy, the older woman across the street, leaned out from her porch, her voice trembling as she called his name. When she saw the blood on his lip, she gasped and yelled for someone to call 911 on the cops themselves. Inside, Sawyer Powell began tearing through Declan's belongings. Drawers overturned, clothes scattered, a lamp knocked to the floor. Finn Butler photographed everything with his department-issued camera, but even he hesitated, because something was off. The house looked normal. Too normal. Declan's gym membership card, his consulting files, lawn equipment, Netflix receipts, a refrigerator covered in drawings and school photos of his daughter, Mila. Nothing about the place hinted at a man hiding anything dangerous. But Reed wasn't here for evidence. He was here to intimidate, to punish, to send a message for reasons the neighbors would never guess. When Declan asked, calm as ever, "Where's your warrant?" Reed slapped him across the face with open contempt. Phones outside caught it. Multiple angles, multiple recordings, multiple witnesses. And those videos spread online faster than Reed realized. Flores called out, annoyed, "Kitchen's clean." Nothing. Powell yelled from the bedroom, "Nothing here either." Butler lowered his camera, his discomfort growing. "Frank, you sure we're in the right house?" Reed ignored them, or pretended to. His confidence was slipping. His voice shook slightly when he ordered Powell to check the garage. Powell obeyed, but minutes later returned empty-handed. That's when Reed's panic finally cracked through. Declan looked up at him, calm, calculating, unbroken, and Reed snapped. He grabbed Declan by the shirt collar. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What do you know? Who told you to snoop around?" The neighbors outside heard every word through the open doorway. Paige Murphy was already live-streaming. Cars slowed to a stop in the street. More phones lifted. More angles captured. People whispered that the officers were acting unhinged. That Declan seemed too calm. That something about this entire moment felt wrong. Powell returned from the garage with nothing more suspicious than a box of dusty gardening tools. Flores wiped sweat from his forehead and muttered, "This is bad, man." Real bad. Reed didn't care. He shoved Declan against the dining room wall, knocking one of Mila's framed photos onto the floor. The glass cracked loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. Where's the money? Reed snarled. Where's the evidence? We know you've been talking to people. Declan stared back, silent. Reed hated that silence. It made him feel small. Answer me, he growled. Still nothing. And that was the moment Reed's confidence finally broke. He stepped back, narrowing his eyes. Declan wasn't scared. He was assessing, calculating, surviving. Flores took a slow breath. Frank, look at him. He's not acting like a regular guy. He's tracking us. All of us. Watch his eyes. Reed turned. For the first time, he saw what his team saw. Declan's focus, his breathing, his stance. Not civilian, not helpless, not random. Who trained you? Reed demanded. Declan didn't answer. Outside, the crowd had grown from curious neighbors to a full-blown cluster of witnesses. Paige Murphy's voice trembled as she repeated, Someone call the news. This isn't right. And one person did, her daughter, Stella Barnes, a Channel 8 producer who arrived with a camera crew minutes later. The officers froze when they saw the news camera pointed at them through the ruined doorway. Reed grabbed Declan again, furious. Who are you working for? He hissed. Declan's lip curled slightly. You should be very careful, detective. Reed blinked. Is that a threat? It's advice. A ripple of unease spread through the room. Then Reed's radio crackled to life. A voice cut through the static, urgent, frantic, and unmistakably authoritative. Reed, what's your status? We're getting calls about news crews. Clean this up. Now. Holden Rivera. The man Declan had spent 18 months investigating. And the moment Reed heard his captain's voice, everything changed. Everything. Because suddenly, Declan wasn't just a calm man on the floor. He was a danger Reed didn't know how to contain. And outside, the crowd reached almost 30. Phones still recording. Still watching. Still waiting. And none of them had any idea how fast this night was about to explode. The moment Holden Rivera's voice cracked through Reed's radio, the mood inside Declan's living room shifted. Panic, real panic, flickered across Reed's face for the first time all night. Because Rivera didn't call unless something was wrong. And Rivera didn't sound angry. He sounded afraid. Declan lifted his head slightly, watching Reed's reaction with the same calm he'd maintained since the door blew open. That calm wasn't normal. That calm wasn't civilian. And Reed could no longer ignore it. Flores swallowed hard. Frank. Captain sounded stressed, man. Shut up, Reed snapped, but his voice cracked. He grabbed Declan and forced him into a chair. Tell me who you are. Right now. Declan said nothing. Outside, Stella Barnes adjusted her camera lens, pushing closer to the doorway. Detective, she called from the porch. Can you confirm whether you have a warrant for this raid? Reed stiffened. Cameras. Witnesses. A growing crowd. And a man sitting calmly in front of him as if midnight raids were part of his weekly schedule. Powell leaned toward Flores, whispering, Something's off. What if we really messed up? What if the intel was wrong? Flores whispered back, Look at him. He doesn't even look scared. Who stays that calm? Declan's breathing rhythm didn't change when Reed paced behind him. He didn't flinch when Powell knocked over a table lamp. He didn't react when Butler snapped more photos of the destroyed door. If anything, his composure tightened, sharpening like a man bracing for a move he already expected. Reed finally walked around and crouched in front of him. Civilians don't sit like this, he murmured. Where'd you learn to breathe like that? Who trained you? Declan lifted his eyes. Steady, controlled, dangerous. I told you, he said softly. You should be careful. Reed's jaw tightened. You think I'm scared of you? Declan didn't answer. He didn't have to, because right then, another neighbor stepped closer to the destroyed doorway. A teenage boy shouted, We're live on TikTok. 50,000 watching. Reed's heart skipped. 50,000. This wasn't a raid anymore. This was a spectacle, and Reed was losing control of the narrative by the second. Powell pulled Reed aside. Look, Frank, we gotta call this in. People can see everything. Reed shook his head violently. No. Rivera said, clean it up. We're not stopping until we find what he told us to find. But nothing in the house made sense. No weapons. No drugs. No suspicious cash. No files. No resumes that matched the man sitting in front of them. Just the fragments of a perfectly normal life Declan had built and lived convincingly. But Powell suddenly froze. Frank, come look at this. Reed stormed into the kitchen. Powell held up a single object, Declan's Samsung phone. Except, this one wasn't a normal phone. The casing was reinforced. The encryption boot screen glowed in an unfamiliar pattern, and a single green light blinked rhythmically. Flores frowned. Wait! That's government-grade encryption. I've seen something like that before once. Reed felt a chill climb up his neck. Government-grade. Declan didn't move, didn't blink, didn't deny it. Reed slammed the phone on the counter. Unlock it. It's not going to unlock for you, Declan replied calmly. You don't have clearance. Clearance. The word hung in the air like a dropped match in dry grass. Flores stepped back. Frank, what if he's not who we think he is? Reed snapped. Don't start that. No, listen, Flores insisted. He's been monitoring all of us. Look at his eyes. He's tracking exits, counting movements. Reed's breath hitched. He's a spy. Declan almost smiled. A spy? No. The room went silent. Outside, the crowd pressed even closer, phones capturing every second. Inside, Declan leaned forward just enough to make Reed step back. I'm someone you really shouldn't have touched. Reed felt his throat tighten. What are you talking about? Who are you? Declan looked him dead in the eyes. I'm the mistake you shouldn't have made. Powell felt the air shift. Frank, call Rivera back. Now. Reed did, but Rivera didn't answer. Flores whispered. What if Rivera set us up? What if this whole thing? Before he finished, a neighbor shouted from outside. More cops are arriving. But there were no sirens, no flashing lights, no engines, just silhouettes moving through the darkness. Reed ran to window. His face drained of color as he whispered, Those aren't metro units. He didn't finish his sentence, because the shapes approaching the house weren't local cops. They were something else, something quieter, something deadlier, something Declan recognized instantly, even from a distance. And suddenly Reed realized he wasn't just dealing with a calm man. He was dealing with a man with backup. Backup he didn't call. Backup Reed had no control over. Backup that now surrounded the entire neighborhood. And Declan finally exhaled, slow, measured, almost relieved, because the night had just changed direction. And none of the officers in that house were ready for what came next. Not one of them. Flores stood frozen at the window, staring into the darkness where unmarked figures moved with uncanny precision. They didn't shout commands. They didn't rush. They simply positioned themselves in the shadows like they already owned the night. Reed slammed the blind shut. Nobody moves until I say so. But Declan tilted his head, listening. He recognized the rhythm, the spacing, the tactical spread. He drilled those maneuvers 100 times. And he knew they weren't here for Reed. Inside the house, tension spiraled. Powell hovered over Declan's encrypted phone like it was a live explosive. Frank, this isn't normal tech. This looks like something the feds use. Reed snapped. Stop guessing. But the panic in his voice betrayed him. He's bluffing. Just some consultant who knows how to look tough. Declan raised an eyebrow. Consultant? Reed's throat tightened. Outside, Paige Murphy stepped deeper into the yard, voice trembling as she filmed live. If you're watching this, something is happening here. More officers or someone just arrived. No lights, no markings. Comments flooded her stream. Those aren't cops. This is federal. What did that man do? Why are they trying to hide the front door? Inside, Butler tried to regain control. Look, maybe he's just some martial arts guy. People take Krav Maga classes all the time. Declan looked up with a faint smile. You think a weekend self-defense class teaches someone how to regulate their pulse under tactical stress? Flores backed away slowly. That's military training. He pointed toward Declan's steady breathing. That's how they teach operators to avoid panic responses. Reed's eyes twitched. He said he wasn't military. He said he wasn't military, Flores said. He didn't say he wasn't something else. The front door frame creaked in the warm night air. Wind moved through the splintered wood. The house seemed to breathe with the tension inside it. Stella Barnes, standing on the porch with her camera crew, leaned forward. Detective, we need a statement. Reed shot back. Step back or leave. But he knew he couldn't touch the press. Not with live footage rolling. Not with half of Henderson recording from their porches. Inside, Declan studied Reed patiently, the way a surgeon might study a rapidly failing patient. You were told to come here, Declan said quietly, but you weren't told why, or who gave the intel. Reed froze, because that was true. Rivera had given orders, but Rivera didn't give explanations. Declan continued, You think you're the hunter tonight, but look around you. He tipped his chin toward the shattered doorway. You're losing control. Fast. Powell swallowed. Frank, we need to reevaluate what we walked into. Reed snapped. He's manipulating you. Am I? Declan murmured. Outside, a hush rippled through the neighbors, because the unmarked figures had moved closer. Their footsteps were subtle but deliberate. Neighbors stepped back instinctively, phones trembling in their hands. Inside, Flores whispered, Frank, who else knew we were coming here? Reed didn't answer. He couldn't, because he'd been asking himself the same question. Declan leaned back in his chair, handcuffs clinking faintly. If I were you, he said calmly, I'd be worried about why your captain is so desperate tonight, and why he sounds afraid of what I know. Reed spun around. What do you know? Declan met his eyes. Enough. Reed's breath hitched. Enough for what? Declan gave a slow, deliberate pause. Enough to bring everything you protected for years crashing down. Powell and Flores exchanged a look, one full of fear and disbelief. But before anyone could speak, Butler's radio crackle was static. Then a voice cut through. Units reported in your area, multiple civilian complaints, media presence detected. Flores went pale. Frank, they're talking about us on open channels. Reed slapped the radio silent. Nobody's calling backup. I have the authority here. Declan studied him. You really don't, Detective. Reed lost it. He grabbed Declan by the front of the shirt. Tell me who you are. Declan didn't flinch. Instead, he spoke softly, so softly Reed had to lean in to hear it. Do you know what happens when someone touches the wrong federal asset? Reed froze. Flores froze. Powell froze. Even Butler's camera hand trembled slightly. Declan continued. The world doesn't collapse quietly. It collapses violently. Outside, Stella Barnes yelled from the porch. Who are those men approaching the house? Neighbors backed up. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted for their kids to go inside. Reed rushed to the window. And this time, he saw them clearly. Shadow-moving, fully equipped tactical silhouettes closing in from every direction. Too organized to be criminals. Too quiet to be local police. Too precise to be anything but a federal response team. Reed stumbled back from the window. No. This wasn't supposed to go this way. Flores whispered. Frank, what did we walk into? Declan lifted his chin slightly. And with chilling calm, he said, You kicked down a door you were never meant to touch. Then the neighbors outside began screaming, because the tactical silhouettes suddenly stopped moving, and all of them turned their heads toward Declan's house at the same exact time. And Declan knew exactly what that synchronized motion meant. They weren't here by accident. They weren't here for Reed. They were here because of him. For a long moment, nobody inside the house moved. Not Reed, not Powell, not Flores, not even Declan. Because outside, those shadow-quiet silhouettes adjusted formation in perfect unison, each one turning toward the splintered doorway as if responding to a silent command. The movement was too synchronized, too controlled to be anything but professional. Reed stumbled backward. "Frank, who are they?" Butler whispered. Declan finally lifted his head. "They're here because you cross a line." Reed shook his head desperately. This can't be federal." Rivera said nothing about federal. Flores backed away from the window. "Frank, this feels wrong. Everything about tonight feels wrong." Reed tried to regain control. "We move him to the van. Now, before anyone gets closer." But the neighbors were already reacting. Paige Murphy shouted across the yard, "Everyone get back. Something's coming." Phones rose higher. Comments exploded across Stella's live stream. "Those aren't police. Why are they surrounding the neighborhood? What did that man do? I'm scared. Someone call the FBI." Inside, Reed grabbed Declan by the arm and dragged him toward the hallway. "You think you can scare us with your comm act? With your breathing tricks? With your fancy phone?" Declan kept a step steady, controlled, calculated. "You're not afraid of me," he said quietly. "You're afraid of what happens when your captain realizes I'm still alive." Reed shoved him harder. "Shut up." But the truth hit him anyway. Rivera never cared about the search. He cared about the silence afterward. Flores whispered, "Frank, be honest. Did Rivera tell you to bring this guy in or get rid of him?" Reed didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep down he knew. Powell's phone buzzed in his pocket. Rapid, non-stop notifications. He glanced down. Breaking. Henderson Raid livestream hits 400K views. Who is Declan Reed? Unmarked units enter neighborhood. Powell's hands trembled. "Frank, this is everywhere. It's viral. We can't hide this." Reed snapped. "Weaken if he never speaks." Declan's eyebrow lifted. "But I already have." Reed blinked. "What?" Declan turned just enough for Reed to see the faintest spark in his eyes. "You think this is the first time I've been watched?" And suddenly Powell understood. "Frank, you didn't trigger this." He did. Reed froze. Declan smiled subtly, not cruel, but knowing. "You kicked in my door," he said calmly, "but I activated the rest." Reed's stomach dropped. "What rest?" Declan inhaled slowly. "Phoenix Protocol." The room went silent. Flores looked at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. "Phoenix what?" Declan didn't look at Flores. He looked directly at Reed. "The extraction code federal assets use when their cover is blown." Reed stumbled back. "You're lying." Declan tilted his head. "Think so?" Outside, the silhouettes tightened formation, inching closer through the dark. Neighbors backed up instinctively, murmuring. Stella whispered to her cameraman, "Those aren't police, they're too controlled." Inside, Flores whispered, "Frank, if he's telling the truth." Reed cut him off. "He's bluffing." Declan stood straighter, even with cuffs biting into his wrists. "Bluffing doesn't bring them here." Reed's breath quickened. No. Rivera said we had time." He said. Declan interrupted softly. "Rivera doesn't control them." The house trembled as a van engine revved outside. Reed dragged Declan forward. "Move. We're leaving now." Powell and Flores hesitated. "Frank, this is a federal neighborhood lockdown." Powell said, "We move him, we expose ourselves." Reed snarled, "We're already exposed." Declan glanced calmly at Flores. "He's right about that." Reed shoved Declan through the hallway, toward the back door. "I'm not letting you ruin my life." Declan shook his head slowly. "I didn't ruin your life." Flores swallowed, voice faltering. "Frank, maybe we should." Declan finished the sentence for him. "You did." It hit the officers harder than any punch. Reed shoved open the back door and froze. A black van sat parked behind the house. Not Metro. Not SWAT. Not marked. It was silent. Engine off. Lights off. But waiting. Reed whispered, No, they can't be here this fast." Declan exhaled softly. "Phoenix Protocol sends the closest team." They didn't come far. Flora stepped back into the hallway. heart pounding. Frank were surrounded. Declan didn't deny it, because he didn't have to. The van doors clicked open. Two silhouettes stepped out, quietly, efficiently, deliberately. No shouting, no broadcasting authority. Just silent, tactical presence. Reed stepped back into the hallway. We go out the front. Move. He turned the corner and froze again, because Declan wasn't the only one with backup. Rivera's corrupt reinforcements were arriving too. Fast, dirty, desperate. Their headlights cut across the street. Their engines roared into the cul-de-sac. Their boots pounded toward the house. Declan understood the danger instantly. He had backup. Reed had backup. Both sides had converged on the same house. Flores whispered, "Frank, both groups are here, federal and—" He didn't finish, because outside, two dangerous forces were seconds away from colliding, and Declan was in the middle, handcuffed, bleeding, outnumbered, and yet somehow the calmest person in the room. Reed grabbed Declan's arm again. "We're taking him," he growled. But the moment he touched him, a new voice echoed from outside. A firm, controlled female voice. "All units, stand by. Phoenix asset located. Do not engage until confirmation." Flores whispered, "Frank, that's federal radio traffic." Reed's knees weakened, because the voice belonged to someone he knew, Hazel Jenkins. And if she was here, this was no raid. This was the end of something much bigger. Declan's eyes shifted toward the window, steady and unafraid. "Detective," he said quietly, "you just ran out of time." And with those words, every shadow outside began moving at once, toward the house, toward the truth, toward the collision none of them could escape. The moment Hazel Jenkins's voice crackled through the air, Reed's last shred of confidence evaporated. He knew that voice. Everyone in the department did. Calm, sharp, the kind of tone that only came from people who live in corridors of authority far above his pay grade. Flores turned to Reed, eyes wide. "Frank, we can't do this. Not with federal units out there." Reed wasn't listening anymore. His brain was spiraling toward one conclusion. A conclusion he had tried to ignore since the moment Declan didn't panic on his living room floor. He wasn't a civilian. He wasn't helpless. He wasn't alone. Powell said out loud, "Frank, we need to walk away." Reed shook violently. "We can't. Rivera will bury us alive." Declan's calm voice sliced through the chaos. "Detective Rivera isn't worried about you walking away. He's worried about me staying alive." Reed froze, because he knew that was true. Flores whispered, "Frank, what did Rivera really tell you before we came here?" Reed didn't answer. He didn't have to, because suddenly lights flashed across the yard. Not police lights, not federal lights, but the aggressive glare of vehicles making no effort to hide their arrival. Rivera's enforcers. 3 cars screeched to a stop. Doors slammed. Heavy boots hit pavement. These weren't officers responding to a call. These were men arriving to finish a job. But the silent shadows on the opposite side of the street didn't move. They just repositioned, calm, coordinated, ready. Neighbors backed up in fear. Some hid behind parked cars. Others ducked inside their homes. But the filming never stopped. Stella Barnes whispered into her mic, "2 different groups converging. This is turning into something dangerous." Reed grabbed Declan by the shirt and shoved him through the back door. "Move!" "Frank, stop!" Powell shouted, but it was too late. Reed dragged Declan toward the back gate, toward Rivera's secondary plan, the one whispered earlier that evening. Pier 19, Warehouse 7. Handle the problem permanently. Flores and Powell exchanged a terrified look before following. They didn't agree. They didn't want this. But they were trapped, caught between 2 forces far more powerful than they realized. Reed shoved Declan into the back of a police van and slammed the doors. "Drive!" he barked at Powell. Powell hesitated. "Frank, we go there, we're not coming back." Reed's eyes burned with desperation. "We're already dead if we stay here." Powell didn't argue again. The van peeled away from the curb, bumping over Declan's splintered door as it tore out of the neighborhood. Stella's camera swung wildly to follow it, Neighbors screamed. Paige Murphy yelled for someone to record the license plate. Declan sat handcuffed in the back, blood drying on his cheek, ribs throbbing but posture perfectly aligned, because now his world had shifted. Now he knew Pier 19 was where everything would converge. Now he knew Hazel's team had tracked him. Now he knew Rivera had crossed the line from corruption to desperation. And now, Declan wasn't just surviving. He was adapting. Another van followed behind. The clean patrol car driven by Flores. Not by choice, by fear. But inside his vest, a faint red light blinked every few seconds. The FBI wire. Declan saw it through the small ventilation grate in the van wall. Their eyes met in the rear mirror. Flores blinked once, slowly. A silent message. I'm still on your side. Declan gave the slightest nod. Powell drove like a man fleeing a burning building. Herrera Street, Charleston, Industrial District. Abandoned warehouses looming like dark skeletons under the night sky. As they neared Pier 19, radio chatter flared to life in Powell's car. Rivera's voice cracked through the static. Get him inside. No cameras. No witnesses. Finish it. Powell slammed the radio off, hands shaking. Reed pressed his gun against Declan's head, voice trembling. You set us up. You brought the feds here. You ruined everything. Declan didn't look at him. I didn't ruin anything. I just didn't hide the truth. Reed snarled and tightened his grip. But he didn't pull the trigger. Not yet. They arrived. Pier 19 stretched before them. Rusted metal, broken windows. Quiet as death. Perfect for things the public shouldn't see. Powell and Flores stepped out first. Flores looked sick. Powell looked numb. Reed yanked the van doors open and dragged Declan onto the cracked concrete. The air smelled of rust, gasoline, and something older, something like the residue of violence. Reed shoved him toward Warehouse 7. Declan paused at the entrance. Same place you took Caden Flores? Reed's breath hitched. Flores froze. Powell whispered, Frank, he knows everything. Reed slammed the door open. Inside, Declan stepped in and understood instantly. Old blood, oil stains, a broken chair against a pillar. This was where Caden Flores, the honest detective, had gone missing. Declan's voice stayed low. This is where you murdered him. Reed snapped. Keep talking and see what happens. But he didn't strike Declan, because Rivera's car was pulling in. Holden Rivera stepped out, latex gloves already on, briefcase in hand. The kind men brought when they planned answers nobody could report. Rivera stepped into the warehouse, eyes cold. So, you're the one who's been asking questions. Declan didn't flinch. You mean the one you've been stealing casino money to hide? Powell inhaled sharply. Flores took a single step backward toward the exit. Rivera stopped walking. Then he smiled. You think being calm will save you tonight? Declan met his gaze. No, but I'm not the only one in danger anymore. Rivera chuckled. You think your federal friends can save you? Declan exhaled, slow and steady. That depends. On what? On how long it takes them to breach your location. Every officer in the warehouse froze. The moment stretched. Then a sound began vibrating the metal beams overhead. First soft, then clearer, then unmistakable. Helicopter rotors. Rivera's expression twisted. No, not yet. Declan straightened, blood glinting under the dim lights. Detective, he said, calm even now, you should have listened when I said you were out of time. Because outside Warehouse 7, shadows moved again. But this time they weren't alone. Laser sights flicked across the walls. Boots hit gravel. A voice shouted through a megaphone. Federal Task Force, stand down. Reed's gun shook in his grip. Rivera's briefcase slipped from his hand. Powell whispered to no one. They're here. Declan closed his eyes briefly. Hazel had found him. It was time for the world to change. And the next second would determine who left Pier 19 alive. For a split second, the entire warehouse froze. Not a breath, not a twitch, not a sound. Just a humming echo of helicopter rotors slicing through the Las Vegas night, and the metallic tremor vibrating the beams overhead. Then the amplified voice boomed again. Federal Task Force, put down your weapons and step out now. Rivera's confidence evaporated. His jaw clenched. His eyes darted toward the exits like a man searching for a door that no longer existed. Reed gripped his gun tighter, voice shaking. Frank, what do we do? Powell whispered. Hold position. Rivera barked. But even he didn't believe it. Declan stood completely still. His breathing had changed. Steady, pattern-controlled. The shift was subtle, but Flores noticed. He's preparing, Flores whispered. That's tactical breathing. He knows a breach is coming. Reed spun toward him. Shut up. But Flores shook his head. Frank, we're done. This is over. Rivera grabbed Flores by the vest. You stay where I tell you. Flores didn't move, but his eyes said everything. He wasn't with Rivera anymore. He wasn't with Reed. Not after what he'd learned. Not after hearing Caden Flores' name drop like a stone of truth in the middle of the night. Rivera turned back toward Declan. Call them off, Rivera demanded. Call off your team. Declan blinked once, slowly. My team, he said quietly. You think I command a federal breach? Rivera hesitated, and in that hesitation, silence broke. A flashbang detonated outside the warehouse. A blinding white pulse lit the windows like sudden daylight. The floor vibrated. Rivera flinched. Reed swore under his breath. Powell ducked instinctively. Declan didn't move. Not an inch. Boom! Another blast, closer, followed by boots thundering across gravel. Flores exhaled. They're coming in. Rivera shouted, Positions, weapons up. Reed raised his gun with trembling hands. Powell copied him, but his grip faltered. They weren't prepared for this. Neither were the officers behind Rivera, the ones he dragged into corruption, thinking they'd never face consequences. Then, the breach hit. A steel battering ram slammed into the warehouse door. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th hit, the door ripped open. Federal agents poured in like a silent wave, coordinated, laser-focused, and unstoppable. Flashlights sliced through the shadows, beams dancing across rusted machinery and stacked metal crates. Federal Task Force, drop your weapons. Red laser dots swept across the room, landing on Rivera, Reed, Powell, Hughes, Fowler. Every corrupt officer now boxing on all sides. Declan stepped back instinctively, positioning himself away from the crossfire path. Even cuffed, he moved like someone who knew the choreography of tactical breaches. Rivera grabbed Declan and yanked him close, pressing a gun against his head. Back off. Rivera screamed. Back off or he dies. Federal agents held their aim but didn't fire. They were trained for situations like this. They could wait 5 seconds. 10, 20. Rivera couldn't. He shook. Sweat dripped down his temple. His grip on the gun wavered. Hazel Jenkins stepped through the breach. Not rushed, not frantic, just calm, cold, in control. Her vest marked her as lead. Her stance marked her as experienced. Her voice marked her as someone the entire task force respected. Captain Rivera, she said evenly, put your weapon down. Rivera laughed a broken laugh. Agent Jenkins, he breathed. Of course they sent you. Davis was right. We never had a chance. Hazel's eyes flicked to Declan, a silent check. He nodded once. She turned back to Rivera. Let him go. This is over. Rivera's voice cracked. It's not over. Not for me. I know what comes next. Federal charges. No bail. No union. Life. Hazel's tone didn't shift. You made those choices. Reed tried to intervene. Captain, stop. Stop before. Shut up. Rivera shouted, jamming the gun harder against Declan's head. Declan closed his eyes briefly, not in fear, in calculation. Holden, he said, voice low, you still think you're in control? Rivera's breath quickened. I am. No, Declan said softly. You're surrounded, outnumbered, outmaneuvered. Rivera's grip shook violently. Declan finished. And you're out of time. A single shot cracked, but it wasn't aimed at Declan. A federal sniper's round tore through Rivera's wrist, forcing him to drop the gun. Rivera screamed, collapsing to his knees as the firearm clattered across the concrete. Hazel stepped forward instantly. "Move in." Federal agents surged. Rivera was pinned. Reed was disarmed before he could blink. Powell dropped his weapon without resistance. Flores raised his hands immediately. Fowler froze with his weapon half raised, but when 5 laser dots landed on his chest, he surrendered. As federal units swarmed, Declan finally exhaled and allowed himself to lean against a steel pillar. Hazel approached him quickly, inspecting his cuffs and checking for injuries. "You good?" she asked quietly. Declan nodded once. "I've been better." Hazel cracked the first hint of a smile. "Chief Davis," she said softly enough that only he heard, "you really know how to attract trouble." Declan smirked. "You say that like it's my hobby." She popped the cuffs off. The angry red marks vanished under his sleeves as he rolled his wrists. Reed stared at Declan with wide, horrified eyes. "Chief," he echoed. "Chief what?" Hazel turned her gaze to him, voice colder than steel. "You didn't raid a consultant," she said. "You kidnapped the head of the Federal Organized Crime Task Force." Reed's knees buckled. No, this can't." But it was. Floodlights illuminated the warehouse. Federal agents secured evidence. Hazel spoke into her radio. Rivera was loaded into armored transport. Powell sat on the floor, sobbing. Flores looked at Declan with pain and relief mixed together. And Declan stood, not as a victim, but as a man reclaiming his identity. A quiet storm after a long night. But outside the warehouse, another vehicle screeched to a stop. A man jumped out, holding a phone, shouting at reporters. "Breaking news! Entire corruption ring exposed. Over 40 officers implicated." And Declan knew this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. Because after tonight, nothing in Las Vegas would ever be the same. But the final strike, the verdict, the fallout, the truth was still coming. And it would shake the city to its core. Sunrise hit Las Vegas differently the next morning. Not soft, not gentle, but sharp. Like the city was waking up to a truth too big to ignore. By noon, every major news outlet in Nevada carried the same headline. Federal Task Force dismantles massive police corruption ring. 47 officers arrested. The footage from Henderson, the broken door, the shouting neighbors, the silent silhouettes, played on repeat across national TV. Clips of Rivera being taken into custody went viral before lunch. Reed's tearful booking photo trended on social media, with captions ranging from anger to disbelief to relief. And in the middle of it all was Declan. No longer the quiet man watering his lawn. No longer the consultant with a borrowed life. No longer the target of a midnight raid gone rogue. He was exactly who Hazel had called him. Chief Declan Reed, head of the Federal Organized Crime Task Force. The man who spent 18 months dismantling corruption from the inside. The courtroom was packed 6 months later. Standing room only. Paige, Murphy, and half the neighborhood sat in the gallery, many for the verdicts, many because they needed to see justice land where it belonged. Judge Morrison entered. Silence fell like a drop curtain. "Captain Holden Rivera," she read, voice firm, "this court sentences you to life imprisonment without parole." Rivera didn't argue. He didn't lift his head. He didn't look at anyone. His empire was gone. "Detective Troy Reed," she continued, "life imprisonment without parole." Reed broke, not dramatically, not loudly, just a quiet collapse of a man who finally understood the weight of every choice he had made. One by one, the sentences fell: Hughes, Fowler, Powell, all receiving decades under federal law. No shortcuts, no soft landings, no union protection, just justice. When the final sentence was delivered, quiet applause rippled through the room, a release of community's fear, anger, and trauma. Outside the courthouse, reporters surged around Declan. Microphones extended like an ocean of questions. "Division Chief Davis, what message does Operation Clean Sweep send to America?" Declan adjusted his credentials, not for show, but for clarity. "It sends a message," he said calmly, "that some doors should never be kicked down. It sends a message that justice doesn't stop at badges, uniforms, or titles. And it sends a message that corruption, even in the shadows, will always be uncovered. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But the words cut through the air like truth always does. His phone buzzed. A message from Mila. Dad, I saw everything. I'm proud you caught the bad guys. He closed his eyes briefly, not from pain, but from a quiet, earned relief. For 18 months, he'd carried a double life, a fabricated identity, and a mission heavy enough to crush most people. Now, he could finally breathe the same life he lived. Later that evening, Declan drove past his old undercover house in Henderson. New residents lived there now. Real consultants, real families, real peace. The neighborhood children played outside. Parents walked dogs. Life looked exactly the way Declan had pretended it was. Hazel called him from the field office. We're seeing new patterns in Chicago PD, she said. High-level corruption. Similar structure. Declan nodded, eyes on the quiet street. How long? Surveillance starts next week. A slow exhale left him, not tired, but ready. All right, he said. Pull the files. We start fresh. Because federal justice didn't sleep, and neither did the people trained to protect it. Declan drove on, city lights reflecting in the rearview mirror like flickers of the past. Each one a reminder that power can be abused, but also reclaimed. Justice didn't ask for permission. It demanded presence. And as long as Declan was part of the task force, someone, somewhere would always think twice before trying to kick down the wrong door. If this story struck you, shook you, or made you think twice about accountability and power, drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoyed today's cinematic breakdown of real-world justice, smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another pulse-pounding story from Black Rise. Here's a quick question for you. If you were Declan, would you forgive any of the officers who turned themselves in early, or should every one of them face full sentencing? Let's talk about it in the comments. Because sometimes justice isn't just a verdict. It's a conversation we all have to keep alive.